Um, Welcome to the St. Michael's Adult Formation Forum on Fair and Affordable Housing. We are so happy that you're here this evening. If everybody could just mute themselves, and if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Please join me in a moment of prayer, and then I'll introduce our stellar panelists. Lord, hear our prayer today for all women and men, boys and girls who are homeless, for those sleeping under bridges, on park benches, or in cars, for those who can only find shelter at night but wander all day, for families broken because they can't afford to pay rent, for those who have no relatives or friends to take them in, for those who have no place to keep possessions that remind them of who they are, for those who are afraid and hopeless. For all these people, we pray that you will provide shelter, security, and hope. We pray for those of us with warm houses and comfortable beds, that we may not be lulled into complacency and forgetfulness. Help us to see your face in the eyes of every homeless person we meet. Empower us to work for justice and peace through words and deeds, and give us open hearts to greet and meet the homeless people in our neighborhoods. Amen. I'm Molly Painter, a member of St. Michael's and a homeless advocate. I'm currently working on CASA's Kings Ridge project, a permanent supportive housing community. And this community evolved for me through just deep personal relationships with women who are chronically experiencing chronic homelessness, and just witnessing their need for housing and all the roadblocks that they face along the way. And so I'm excited to introduce our experienced group of panelists this evening and hear how they are involved and passionate about fair and affordable housing. Our first panelist is Jack Holtzman. He's a senior staff attorney and co-director of the Fair Housing Project with Legal Aid of North Carolina. Thank you, Jack, for being here. We also have Lorena McDowell, who is the Wake County Director of the Department of Housing and Community Revitalization. And I've had the privilege of crossing paths with Lorena because they partnered in the Kings Ridge project. Wake County did. And then we have Mary Rika Todd, who many of you know is a St. Michael's member. She is a housing advocate who is currently serving on the Bishop's Council for Affordable Housing, and she has been working in this space for a long time. So we're thrilled to have all of them. And tonight our moderator is Ruth Thurman Scott, who is another St. Michael's member and anti-poverty and homeless advocate. We want to remember Jeffrey Dillman, and let's see, sorry, of the Fair Housing Project. This conversation is in tribute to him tonight. We remember him for his assistance with this forum and also for his life's work to make affordable and fair housing a reality for so many. And as we all know, St. Michael's is a very generous parish in supporting a lot of causes around homelessness and housing for those most vulnerable, and we're really thankful for that. And tonight we really want to explore how we can push a little further and not only be givers, but also change makers. So Jack, Lorena, and Mary Rika will help us understand the barriers, both historical and present, to fair and affordable housing that have sort of led us to where we are today and that have fueled the current housing crisis. And we will also discuss changes that are needed to bring about permanent solutions. So I'm looking forward to hearing from them, and I'll turn it over to Ruth.
Thank you, Molly. I also want to thank our clergy at St. Michael's, Reverend Jones, Reverend Paul, and Reverend Gloff, for granting us time on the calendar to have this timely conversation on fair and affordable housing. Very briefly, I get asked often, what was my inspiration for becoming an advocate for affordable housing. It started way back in the year 2004 with the Minister of Outreach at my Episcopal parish in an affluent community in another state. And the issues were around too many of the essential workers in our town were struggling to evade homelessness and at the same time try to find housing that was affordable near their places of employment, as well as quality schools for their children. A few years earlier, the same minister of outreach, who's now in heaven, had co-founded a nonprofit to provide transitional housing with a suite of supportive services, assistance for 2 years with intense focus on identifying opportunities to change the trajectory of these young families and children in particular. And so that was my introduction to affordable housing. I am, like Molly, very honored to moderate this panel of housing experts this evening. Very briefly, in terms of format, I will ask each panelist 2 to 3 questions, which has been given to them in advance for preparation and time efficiency. We expect to have time towards the end for 2 to 3 questions from the audience. So again, I echo Molly, put your questions in the chat. To frame our conversation this evening and common understanding, I have a few definitions to share with you. Affordable housing, number 1. According to the US Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, housing is considered affordable when no more than 30% of a household's annual income is spent on housing costs, and that's usually rent and utilities. Household is considered cost burden when more than 30% is spent on housing cost. Again, rent and utilities would be the focus. Very briefly, oftentimes we encounter and have conversations with individuals who, when they think of affordable housing, they think of public housing exclusively. Public housing is one category of affordable housing, but affordable housing is much larger than public housing. Public housing was established to provide safe rental housing for low-income individuals, families, the elderly, persons with disability, and eligible immigration status. The rents are subsidized, and HUD oversees this housing with local agencies administering them. You may have heard of Raleigh Housing Authority or the Durham Housing Authority. Those would be public housing, very much needed, but the category of affordable housing is much larger. This evening, we will focus mostly on renters in the low to moderate income categories. Panelists will share some information that has and continues to impact both low-income renters and homeowners, very specifically persons and communities of color. So I want to get started with an opening question from each panelist, basically sharing with us the mission of their agency and their key responsibilities working to ensure access to affordable housing. Mary Rika is our independent housing advocate. So I'd like to start with you, Mary Rika. Just tell us a little bit of how you're spending your time as an advocate. And before you start, I would ask each of you to keep your remarks to 90 seconds because we have some big questions coming up. So, Mary Rika.
Okay, thank you, Ruth. Well, I've spent a career working in public administration, working with public entities and nonprofit organizations that provide human services and affordable housing services. And I very quickly learned when I was just doing, quote, service-related work in mental health and aging, that if people don't have a safe, affordable place to live, to sleep at night, you can put together all kinds of services and that doesn't make for a good situation. So the latter part of my career was spent in particularly the development of supportive housing. So I've gone from being a funder and program administrator of affordable housing and particularly supportive housing to being an advocate and am currently serving on several boards. One is an organization that works statewide to create affordable housing and works with local governments and nonprofits. I serve on the Bishop's Committee on Affordable Housing, and we are working to develop materials to increase the advocacy capacity of parishes in the diocese. So that's a primary focus now. I'm also working, serve on the Phoenix Village Board, and am active in a number of other nonprofit organizations here in town, but all of which, in one way or another, serve the homeless or those of low and moderate income. Those are at risk individuals.
Great, thank you. Busy lady. Jack, we invite you to share your agency's mission and your key responsibilities, please.
Sure, thank you. So the mission of the Fair Housing Project of Legal Aid of North Carolina is to challenge and eliminate housing discrimination in the state, across the state. We do that by 3 methods. We do education and training like we're doing today. We do fair housing testing. We will send out matched paired testers, one white and one black, and see, for example, whether they are treated in a fair, equal manner or in a discriminatorily different manner. The third thing we do is enforcement. We file lawsuits and administrative complaints, lawsuits either in state or in federal court, or administrative complaints with our state's Human Relations Commission or any of the local substantially equivalent agencies in Greensboro, Durham, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Orange County, to enforce fair housing laws, whether it's the federal Fair Housing Act or our state Fair Housing Act. 2 cases I just want to highlight dealing with affordable housing. We sued both the towns of Clemens and Pinehurst under our state Fair Housing Act when they refused to allow affordable housing to be built within their city limits. Our state Fair Housing Act actually has affordable housing as a protected category, and therefore is an important tool to expand and help create affordable housing in North Carolina.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Lorena, we invite you to share your agency's mission and your key responsibilities.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I appreciate your time and being here with you all. I'm Lorena McDowell. I am Wake County's Director of Housing Affordability and Community Revitalization. It is a long title that we lovingly just refer to as housing. Our department's mission is to ensure that quality affordable housing is available for all Wake County residents. That is a big bite right now, especially given the current environment. And so our department is responsible for the spectrum of affordable housing, all the way from the largest men's shelter in North Carolina at South Wilmington Street Center to funding most of all the shelters here in Wake County, to multi-million-dollar investment in affordable housing development, to hundreds of vouchers of permanent supportive housing, not to be confused with Section 8 or Housing Choice, but they do function similarly. Think Coke and Pepsi, different companies, similar product. And so we have responsibilities across the entire spectrum. I have a team of about 100 that work with me on all of those issues across Wake County right now and growing.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. We're just delighted to be here and learn from all of you. We appreciate you and your work. I'd like to now move to a couple of questions in each panelist area of expertise, where we learn a little bit more about some of the root causes, the challenges, and opportunities. And here again, we're watching the time. So if you're able to keep your response to 2.5 minutes, I would appreciate it. So I want to start with Jack. Jack, according to the National Low Income Housing Coalition in 2019, this is pre-COVID, the US had a shortage of 6.8 million rental units available and affordable for the extremely low income renters. So can you reflect on or share with us how we would get to this point in these United States? Are there historical injustices or their past policies or practices that enable some of this and continue to influence the outcomes we see?
Well, sure. So I have a few brief slides that I'd like to show the audience if I can. And if Drea, if you could put those up, I will go through them in 2 minutes.
Great, thank you.
So next. Drea? If you can
Sorry,
move to
glitch.
the next slide. So while Drea is trying to, there we go. So obviously, as a result of both state and federal policies, there's a dearth of affordable housing. But in addition to the fact of a lack of public investment in affordable housing, in the United States, there's a terrible history of discrimination in housing, so that communities of color have been excluded from the existing housing that is there. So these are just a few slides just to give you a very short sense of historically how we came to this point, right? So you can see the slide up on the left there about we want tenants, white tenants in our white community. The one down on the lower left, that is what was called a sundown town in the 1800s and through to the 1920s, even the 1930s. People of color were prevented from staying overnight in many towns in the Midwest and other parts of the country, where if you were a person of color and you stayed in that town, when the sun went down, you could be jailed, beaten up, sometimes killed. And so that was another formal governmental way through ordinances to exclude persons of color from existing housing. That press clipping there, it says Negroes flee from Forsyth, that's from 1890, back when, or excuse me, about 1910, when there were about 1,000 people in Forsyth County, Georgia, and as a result of harassment and again, government-inspired racism, they pushed out the entire African-American population from that county down to zero, so that there were no more persons of color in that county, and their property was taken by adverse possession. That other large photo is from 1986, unfortunately, when individuals tried to reintegrate Forsyth County, and you can see what that mob there thought about the fact of allowing persons of color back into the community. Next. Here, something a little more silent, but again, kind of having the imprimatur of our laws and enforcing contracts and state social norms they were called restrictive covenants. They were secret, well, not so secret. They were silent. You wouldn't necessarily know about them. They would be in any deed. Those of you who own houses now, if you search back in those deeds, they may still have these racist restrictive covenants that prevented persons of color from owning or living in the house, even though they are constitutionally void, and our Supreme Court has found that they are unconstitutional and unenforceable. Many of them still exist, and they were certainly used up through 1950 or 1948 when they were found to be unconstitutional as a way, again, a kind of a silent way to exclude persons of color from predominantly white communities. This one was taken, this is from here in Raleigh, this specific restrictive covenant. Next. It wasn't until up until 1950, the National Association of Real Estate Boards, their code of ethics required that real estate agents promote segregation, right? And that specific section that is taken there below it, that is the verbatim wording that said that it was unethical, supposedly, to allow individuals whose presence would clearly be detrimental to property values in the community, right? Members of any race or nationality. So clearly, there is a history here, both of private discrimination as well as government enforced, sometimes initiated discrimination in housing that added an extra burden to obtaining affordable housing for persons of color. Next. This is a map of Durham from the 1930s. People may be familiar with the concept of redlining. This was a map for the insurance companies that designated certain areas as undesirable and made it impossible or extremely costly to obtain homeowners insurance or to refinance or to obtain a mortgage. And so those red areas, which were predominantly where African-American and immigrant individuals lived, were redlined and made considered undesirable, and people were not supposed to, banks would not loan there. And so housing stock would deteriorate. You couldn't, if you were a person of color, you couldn't purchase a home. And so again, this was a way that was a double burden upon persons of color, in addition to affordability. Next and last. So for appraisers, even in the concept of appraising a house for a mortgage or refinancing, the norm up through 1977 was that appraisers would consider it as they would adjust the value downward if the ethnic composition of a neighborhood was not homogeneous. And so if it was a mixed neighborhood, that was considered a bad thing for the appraisers. It took a lawsuit from the federal government to change this in terms of instruction for appraisers. So that is just a very quick and short listing of how there's an extra burden in addition to affordability for communities of color in obtaining housing in North Carolina and around the state.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. For anyone who would like to delve a little deeper into the role that governments, meaning federal, state, and local, play, we would recommend the book, The Color of Law, How Our Government Segregated America by Richard Rothstein, and I have it listed on the resource sheet. So a lot of bad things has happened, Jack, and the Fair Housing Act came to be in 1968 to try to correct some of the problems that existed around discrimination in rental sales and lending, as you just mentioned. Can you comment on how effective the Fair Housing Act has been and where it has fallen short, if it has?
Sure. So the Fair Housing Act, both the federal and the state, can be important tools to fight discrimination in housing, but they are only as effective as people and organizations to enforce them and who are aware of them. And so unfortunately, many people are not aware of their rights to live in housing free of discrimination, may not realize even that they've been discriminated against. Today's South is different than the South of 20, 30 years ago, where somebody might refuse to rent to you because you are a single woman, or because you are a person of color, or because you are a person with a disability. Now, you will get a smile and somebody will just tell you, I'm sorry, there's nothing available. And individuals may not even realize that they've been discriminated against. That's why fair housing testing is a crucial tool, part of the all the various different ways to enforce our fair housing laws. So education and enforcement are very important. And certainly, we have not reached a point where discrimination doesn't exist anymore. The fight is still important and needed. And I'll just stop there.
Great, thank you. And then the last quick question for you is around tenant protections. We heard a little bit more with the pandemic, while there were moratoriums preventing evictions and so forth. We do know, and probably because people not aware of their rights, that it was happening. So can you comment a little on tenants protection and how strong it is, or they are in North Carolina and Wake County?
Sure, of course. So Chapter 42 of our North Carolina General Statutes deals, as the Residential Rental Agreements Act, deals with and provides specific legal protections for tenants, whether it's dealing with habitability or security deposits, or when notice has to be given if a housing provider seeks to evict a tenant. The laws are there. In addition, Wake County itself, among its ordinances, has its own habitability requirements, minimum housing code. It could be stronger, but it is effective and it is used. One way to make it stronger would be to adopt what the city of Charlotte has in its ordinance, which makes it actually illegal for a landlord to continue to collect rent after the housing inspectors have determined that certain important violations, extremely unsafe violations exist. So there is within the Charlotte ordinance something that I think Wake County would benefit from adopting as well to strengthen its housing ordinance. But they exist. Again, education is an important tool for people to become aware of that.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Lorena, I'm going to pass the baton to you. You have a big job, a big department, and many of the individuals on this call live in Raleigh or Wake County, support many nonprofit organizations or housing ecosystem organizations. So we want you to help us understand the state of affordable housing in Wake County. Maybe there's some key metrics that you can share with us.
Sure, thank you. So when my department was created or commissioned 3 years ago, the county had done a study that said we were short 36,000 units for affordable housing. That meant that they believed over 36,000 people in Wake County were spending more than 30% of their income on their housing related costs. When we dug in a little more and brought on some additional expertise in research and data, we found that the number was actually closer to 56,000.
Oh, wow.
And so there are, to date still, we've made some efforts, but we've also lost some units. So to date, there are still about just over 56,000 unit shortage here, we believe, in Wake County. That's a bigger conversation than just creating units, because you really need to fix the entire system of housing affordability, right, to really get at the issue. But that is the deficit. And I think a lot of folks have focused mostly on, asking questions about those who are the lowest income, so under 30% of AMI or area median income. However, our research is showing that the largest deficit is actually split between those who are 30% and below and those who are between 30 and 50% and below. So all the way up to 50% of the area median income are struggling just as bad as folks who are at the lower end of the income here. And truth be told, it goes up to even 100%, because housing is really expensive here and incomes have not kept pace for most of the residents here in Wake County. So it's incredibly difficult. When you look at wages and housing costs, there's a major gap there. So we know that a 2-bedroom in Wake County is around $1,200 per month, as opposed to $960 in North Carolina. And North Carolina has a housing crisis, and it's even more expensive here. We have a smaller vacancy rate than North Carolina and the nation has a housing crisis. Having a really low vacancy rate puts more pressure on the cost of units in your community, because landlords have their pick, right? And you can also create a space where there can be more barriers put on. You need to earn 3 times the rent, have perfect, history, criminal history and rental history, because they have options. And so that's incredibly difficult. And then when you look at the renter wage here in Wake County, the median renter wage is $18.96. But in order to afford a 2-bedroom here in Wake County, you would need to make approximately $23.08. So most renters here can really only afford a 1-bedroom. Even if you're at the average median space, right? That's not even just talking about low income. And so if you've got multiple folks in your family or children, you have to have multiple people in your home. And if you look at the minimum wage earners, because North Carolina is still at the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25. In order to afford a 2-bedroom in Wake County, you would need to have 3.18 full-time jobs. If we let that sink in for a second, we understand how incredibly difficult it is for those who are low income here in Wake County. You can't just have a 2-person income on minimum wage and still afford your home. So it's incredibly difficult. There's a huge gap between incomes and the cost of living. And there's enormous pressure that continues to push the cost of living up here in Wake County. Populations that are most at need here, we have begun as a new department collecting research and data on demographics. One of the biggest opportunities that we took to collect data was with the House Wake Eviction Prevention Program, because we've had 16,000 applicants to it thus far, and over 11,000 that have fully completed applications. And so we looked at who's applying for those funds. Who are the folks who were on the precipice and COVID just knocked them over, right? Those are the folks that we know maybe weren't homeless before, but were on the verge. And 2/3 of the folks who needed this program were separately either women, people of color, or those who are low income. And collectively, 4/5 of the people fall into one of those categories. So it's very clear, even just looking at the data from that one program, whom we need to start focusing our efforts around to help them come back from the edge of that cliff and be able to find some housing sustainability here in Wake County. And that is exactly the direction that we're moving in right now.
Oh, wow. So being low income and a person of color is one of the highest risk factors for experiencing unstable housing for women. Okay. Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow, sobering information. So let me move on to a related question, and that is Raleigh, Wake County, the Triangle is considered the best place to live. And, we accepted that. That's why we relocated here, and many other people are doing so. But what tools or best practices is Wake County researching or thinking about to respond to that? You have a lot of vacancy, a lot of shortage, but not enough housing.
Absolutely. There's lots of work that's being done. And I do have some slides for this question, if we don't mind sharing them. I think they're relevant and might help to keep me from being too long-winded, because there's a lot going on right now in the housing department. And again, we've got a strong team. We spent a year building the department, and we just hired the last person when COVID hit. So we've been running at full speed for about 3 years straight now as a new department. That's okay. That's what we do. You can go to the next slide. And this actually is a little bit outdated, because what's important, well, you can go back one, for this conversation is those 3 categories that we are working on. Those are our 3 divisions, how we chunk the work that we're doing and how we put forth our best efforts. But now data analytics is actually a 4th division. It just became a division this year, midway through the year, with some new work that we were asked to do. And so we're really focusing on data analytics just as much as we are the other programs. We can go to the next slide. But our housing plan that was drafted for the department before the department came to be had a number of things that we need to focus on. And in general, there were sort of 3 tranches, and it was land use policy, leverage programs, and then additional public resources, increasing public resources. And so some of these things you can see here either are checked off because we've accomplished that from the plan, or they're still happening, we're still working on them, but not the least of which are working with the municipalities to think about their zoning ordinances. I think Jack was talking about some of the ordinances, and a lot of that stuff happens at the city municipal level. And so we as county have to work very closely with them to make sure they're thinking about, when they're putting new policy in place, does this hurt or help affordable housing development? And even before that, it was conversations on helping them understand that affordable housing issues are all of our issues, right? All across Wake County, we're all in this together. And I think we've gotten the municipalities there now. And when we began, the city of Raleigh had an affordable housing plan. We had a plan, and that was pretty much it. And now 6 of the municipalities, through our partnership and work, have either completed or are in the process of completing their own affordable housing plan. We're looking to leverage more dollars, like our acquisition and preservation fund is working on. And then again, looking at public land disposition and how Wake County itself dispositions its property. Through our work, it is now required that every plot of land that Wake County owns and dispositions is evaluated for affordable housing first before it can go out to the open market. Next slide. And I'll go quickly. You can see some of the progress of our department. And as you can tell, each year there's more that we add to it. A lot of this are additional things that we added to our plan as we went. We realized there was more work to be done, and we added more work that needed to happen in our community as we went along. Just the time, I'll just keep moving. Next slide. And you can see our investment. This is a really important factor. Having strategy is super important. That's my job, right? Having staff that are super intelligent and know how to do their work is important. I've got them, but none of this happens without investment. Outcomes follow investment in the story. And so Wake County has put a significant amount of money into investing affordable housing development. These numbers do not include COVID resources, because if they did, you would see an additional $100 million this year from my department alone. But these are the numbers, the investment in federal and county dollars that we're leveraging to build affordable housing, to support the shelters and homeless systems, to push vouchers out there for folks who we consider familiar faces, or those who, but not for these vouchers, will not stabilize, and intensive case management. Next slide. And developing units. And our goal was to develop 2,500 units within 5 years. Wake County actually announced a couple of months ago, we hit that goal in year 3. We're incredibly proud. We got to 2,507 to be exact. And my division director over development would have my, if I didn't say those last 7. So 2,507 units, and we're still working to continue to develop, but we know that we can't just develop our way out of it. We have to also stop the loss. And so we're also very focused on how we can preserve affordable housing. And to that end, we've just launched a preservation fund that is working now with a large banking partner who's helping us to leverage our dollars further. It's essentially another arm of our department that acts as a community bank for affordable housing development and can move as fast as the open market, so we can preserve units before they're lost to the open market. And I think that's it for this question that I have in terms of information to share. Oh, important considerations that you all know we're working on for the coming year. We continue to focus on community input. For those of you who are on this call who are interested in being a part of the conversation, we've put together an Affordable Housing Advisory Committee. It is open to the public, and folks can join those conversations and share their thoughts. But we are looking to more deeply engage with the community this year so that we can ensure that it is what the community wants and needs. We are putting more efforts into research and data. Like I mentioned earlier, it is now a 4th division of our department as opposed to kind of a standalone resource. And we are incorporating a ton of shifts. As COVID has come our way and other things have come our way, we've shifted, we've been flexible, we've launched additional programs to ensure that we're able to support the community best we can, not the least of which was our House Wake plan. That was the first in the nation as a strategic plan to deal with housing related issues related to COVID. And then again, working with municipalities to ensure that they're continuing to push forward in affordable housing and the affordable housing space. And that's it for that, those slides.
Okay, great information. And maybe that last slide you can leave with us. We can share it with the community since you have invited them to consider participation. So, wow, incredible work. And we're very pleased with some of the progress. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to Marika. Marika, you have been so attuned to what's going on at the national church level, as well as the Episcopal Diocese of North Carolina. And a lot of what we are seeing is the conversation around building the beloved community. And I wanted you to perhaps take a minute to just kind of preview what that means and how does affordable housing fit into that imperative. I know we've heard it from the presiding bishop as well as our local bishop. Marika? Marika, are you on mute? Drea, can you see if Marika is on mute?
Beloved community, put most simply, I think, is loving our neighbors as ourselves. And it's responding to our neighbors in need, extending ourselves to take actions to provide safe, affordable housing for those who have no place to call home. And Ruth, are we going to show our video now?
If this is a good time.
Yeah, I think that this little video, and then I'll follow up with a comment, it really says what being a beloved community is all about. And it's the St. Michael's experience with our friend Elizabeth.
I still have it. This is me and this is Seth sitting
Can you
outside
increase the
St.
volume?
Michael's, when we were a family in the Family Promise to church. St. Michael's members made sure that we were just not going to go through this cycle without getting the necessary help we needed to sustain our lives. I was at my wit's end. I did not know how to help my son Seth with special needs who had finished school. St. Michael's made sure that not only did I get the help, that the help was exactly what Seth needed. They guided me with my finances, and they gave me the confidence to go out there, get gainful employment, and get a house of my own. So we cured the homelessness by curing the cause of the homelessness, and that for me was help with SEP and a constant income. I now own my own home and run my own business, and I ask you to continue the help that was given to me. May it continue to change the life of those who walk through your doors, lost, tired, and destitute. To God be the glory, and thank you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Rika?
I think that video really says more than I could ever say about what being a beloved community is, because we met Elizabeth on a dark and stormy night, and she really needed a lot of help, and so did Seth. And we took them in and enveloped them with our love and care, and began a journey that lasted a little over a year, from our first meeting when they came to us through Family Promise. And we have continued to be friends with them and see them now for several years. But it really is, I think it epitomizes what being a beloved community is all about. It also calls for us to work for racial reconciliation and social justice, because racism and the present day inequalities in income in this country are starkly evident in housing. And housing impacts people's health, their access to education, employment, being in a safe neighborhood. All of these things really are tied up in where you live and how you are able to function. So working to assure that our neighbors have access to safe, affordable housing is really part of becoming a beloved community and welcoming all of God's children into our community.
Wow, that's a nice summary, and pointing out that housing is so impactful on all the determinants of quality of life, the education, economic mobility, healthcare, and of course, reducing poverty. And thank you for wrapping that into, that's important if we want to become the beloved community. Well, you all have really enlightened us in an introductory way. We have, and hopefully we'll have some follow-up sessions to continue the conversation for those who are interested. I want to pose a last question for the panelists, and then we may be able to take a question from the audience. But I think you're all have helped us to appreciate that housing problems are complex and frustrating. No easy answers from historical history to present day. But I think we also know that we can't over-rely on the nonprofit sector, being it 501c3s or communities of faith, that we need investments from all levels of government to right this situation that we are in. So I would love for each of you in 30 seconds, 30, 40 seconds, to tell us what are your hopes regarding advancing equity and justice in housing for 2022 and beyond. And I'll start with you, Jack.
That's a tall order there. What are my hopes for advancing justice and equity?
Yes, in housing.
Right. Well, I guess it's more programs like this so that people will become engaged and will make their voices heard and contribute both in terms of activities like in St. Michael's, as well as assisting individuals who may experience housing discrimination. I would encourage people to contact our office if they would like to be a tester, if they would like to play a role in helping to prevent and address housing discrimination. We are always looking for housing testers, white and black, male and female, who can help us challenge and eliminate housing discrimination in North Carolina.
Excellent. Thank you. Wow, we've got some call to actions here. I love that. Lorena.
Yeah, I think my hope for this year as a department and our goal is to focus more on community involvement and working more closely with faith communities, just advocates in general, getting out there. We're actually bringing on a full-time position to help us do just that. And my hope is that we can do dig a lot more deeper into our research and data to ensure that we're moving in the right direction as needed for the communities. But beyond just the work that we're doing in the housing department, my hope for justice in housing is that we're able to look beyond sort of just who we're serving. Yes, we know that we need to focus on women, people who are incredibly low income, and people of color, but it's beyond that. So if you even look at the development space, how are we preparing affordable housing developers of color to be able to compete in the market here, so that for the dollars that I'm able to put out to the community for development, they're able to come to the table and compete with sort of the Goliaths that they're kind of coming to the table and asking for the same dollars of me from. So I would like to push past, I want to continue to serve the community, but I also want to push past that and think about how we're also raising people of color up who are in other spaces in affordable housing, be it development or in service, and ensuring that we're propping them up so they're able to compete in the broader market so they can do more service to the community as well.
Oh, I love that plug for inclusion and seat at the table. So thank you very much. We are just about 2 minutes, a minute or 2 minutes left for this part of the session. I have some follow-up closing comments. So Mary Rika, you gave us a great summary of things around beloved community. Is there anything on your mind that we as a faith community should be discerning regarding finding sustainable solutions to this issue?
Well, my hope would be that we would all, as a faith community, become better informed advocates on behalf of affordable housing. You know, our challenge is certainly resources, but our biggest challenge is not the lack of resources. It's the political will and how we spend and allocate those resources to create a continuum of affordable housing and services to meet the needs of all of our citizens. And to help with that, the Bishops Committee has been working on a series of tools to increase advocacy skills, sample letters to write to elected officials, suggestions on meeting with elected officials and others, and really promoting say yes in our communities to affordable housing rather than no. And so if there's anything that I can do or a committee can do to help with that regard, we certainly are available to do that. It's also on the diocesan website. So, you know, to really promote the political will to do what we know needs to be done.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, you all have been terrific panelists, so much information, such servants in the community doing this work. And I love that you have invited us to be a part. The conversation that Lorena mentions, Testa, that sounds exciting, Jack. To be able to participate there, and Marika and the Bishops' Council working on tools that can be shared with us as well as other parishes. So that's really exciting, and I hope that we are able to do more sessions similar to this. What we will do as a follow-up, this session has been recorded or is being recorded. We will share that with you. We have your email address, and we put together just a one-page resource list. And it does provide Jack's office contact information, Lorena's office contact information, a link to the website that Mary Rika mentions. It lists a couple of books, a film, things that if you want to dive a little bit deeper, and we've heard about the importance of education, so we've provided some resources for you to do that. I'll try to work with my colleagues in the social justice ministry area to see if we can put together a short survey to share with you regarding what you thought about this, what was good, what was missing, what would you like more of. A couple of things that we thought about in putting this together is an advocacy workshop, for instance, more interfaith collaboration. And if you want to do small group discussions, we have heard a little bit about, well, what about gentrification? What about evictions? Those are all huge topics, but if there are enough people interested in them, we certainly have experts within the community who would be willing to share their knowledge and expertise. So we have a lot of work to continue, but I'm just delighted that you were interested enough to join us. And I am super pleased that the panelists made the time to spend this hour with us. So with that, I think we are just about on time. Actually, we have a minute left. Anyone, any of the panelists have something they want to say in 30 seconds or 60 seconds? If so, we'll keep to our 7 o'clock departure time so we could do that. Drea, I don't know if any questions showed up in the chat that we have a minute, we could address one.
No questions.
No questions?
Nothing, no.
Okay, all right, that meant
Can I shout a question out very quickly, Ruth?
Yes, John?
First of all, thank you all for putting this on. Molly, you're a star, and everything you're doing in the housing area that we're aware of is great. Ruth, great job at moderating, and the panelists were wonderful. I wanted to suggest that we look at one other question later on, and we don't have to do it tonight. And that is, what is the obligation for developers who are tearing down affordable housing in order to build high-end apartment buildings in Raleigh? What's their obligation to build affordable housing? I came from a community north of here in Maryland where there were laws on the books in terms of a one-to-one requirement for that. A stone's throw from where I'm sitting, Hayes Barton Place is going to build a very, very nice retirement community for the elderly. And they tore down a heck of a lot of affordable housing in order to stage that area. So again, we don't have to answer that tonight, but I would love to hear some input to that in the future, and what we can do as a community, not to deal with legislators, one-on-one on adding more money, but going to the profit side of this and seeing what they can do in order to help us with affordable housing.
I know we're at
Excellent.
7, but I would love to respond.
Yeah, that's what,
Moment.
let me just, for those who need to sign off, please do so, because the official part of the presentation is done. But that is a question, John, that comes up a lot. And I know I would love for Lorena to opine on that for the few of the folks who want to stay around. So Lorena?
Sure, that is a great question. And the answer is they have no responsibility. That is the simple answer here. Maryland has inclusionary zoning, as do many other states, where they can require affordable housing development by law. That is illegal in North Carolina. And so what you can do, what I ask a lot of folks to do if they get the chances to work with folks who are able to talk to your state legislators who can push for, inclusionary zoning here in North Carolina. If it was allowed, then I could work with local municipalities to put ordinances on the books that say, in order to develop or build here, you must some ratio of rebuilding affordable housing. Because it is illegal to require affordable housing development, what we've been doing is incentivizing affordable housing development. And that is why that investment slide is so important. Because anytime a developer uses any of our funding for either new development, for acquisition, for rehabilitation, we require 30 years of affordable housing. And so, and it is legally binding because they have taken our resources to do this thing. And so that is the best tool that we have right now. We're looking at things like long-term land leases and so on and so forth, but we are not legally allowed to require affordable housing development in North Carolina.
Lorena is right that legally, it's not generally permissible. However, a municipality may go to the General Assembly and request permission for that municipality to require inclusionary zoning. And it has been done in a couple of communities in North Carolina. I hate to say it, but developers certainly don't want you to know that little detail, that it can be done. And when I say there are things that we can do if we have the political will to do it, inclusionary zoning would be one of the things at the top of my list in terms of political will to make that happen. Another area of political will is when a community develops something like Kings Ridge, which is modeled on Moore Place in Charlotte, when they were able to save the community almost $2 million in money that was spent in the jail, law enforcement, the emergency rooms, rather than taking those savings and putting those savings back in to create more affordable, supportive housing. They just said, well, no, we'll use it on our programs. And so that savings did not go back into creating more supportive housing. That's another area that I would hope in the future that we would work on. But
Thank you.
Those are- Go
That would-
ahead.
Thank you for bringing that up, John, because it's very important.
It is. I come from a state with inclusionary zoning. So when I first heard it was illegal in North Carolina, I had to do a little more work to understand, this whole issue about petitioning the General Assembly and working with our public officials. So yeah, John, that was a great question. And it's that kind of question on areas, inclusionary zoning or gentrification or the wealth gap, that we really would love to have some small group conversations. So when you get the feedback form, share with us what topics you feel passionate about. And I know there are folks in the community who would partner with us to educate us more on that. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Is there any other burning question from someone that Lorena, Marika, or Jack would take on? Otherwise, we will say good night. Any other last call? Any other questions? So, well, you have been a terrific audience. The panel was stellar, as we said at the beginning. You all have just really enlightened us and to help us think about what is possible and what our role can be, even as, so many movements have been led by people with deep faith, deep religion. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to revive the movement to be and build a better community. And it just incorporates everything that our panelists have told us: political will, inclusion, all of those things. So thank you very much for your time. Look for the recording in a day or so with the resource list. And if we get anything else from either of the panelists, we will share that with you as well. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, Ruth. That was great.
Oh,